So I guess I've been on the edge of the parking industry on and off for about 25 years, and probably my most recent kickoff back in the parking industry was in 2013. I helped launch a energy fund in Europe called Future Energy Solutions, which focused on two core markets, chicken sheds and car parks. And what Future Energy Solutions did was invest in replacing lighting systems for car park owners, take out the old fluorescent lighting systems, put in new LED systems with lightings and controls, and manage and operate that for them for a period of time, using the energy savings to pay back the investment that was made on their behalf. And we did deals right the way across the industry in Europe, the US, and as far afield as Australia. So coming out the back of the FES business in 2018, one of the things that happened with that business is that NCP, who we had a very large contract with, got sold to Park24. And when Park24 bought NCP, they got quite a big premium as a result of the FES contract that was in place, because we were saving NCP at the time around £4 million a year in their energy bills. And so at that point, I started looking, along with some of the institutional owners of car parking assets, for other opportunities in that space, and started to get really interested in what was changing in the car parking market. But one of the big challenges facing car parking owners was that car parks were sort of half full. And if you think about car parks as a property asset, they're inherently inefficient. Half the space is a road or a ramp or an office or a toilet. And therefore, if you are half full, your income is being derived from only 25% of the physical space. So we started thinking pretty hard about what else you would use that space to do. And I think if we look to the parking industry now, there's obviously a lot of discussion around how to intensify the use of space for other things and hyperlocal hubs and those sorts of things. And we formed a business on the back of that early stage idea in 2019 called Infinium Logistics Solutions. Well, I was introduced to Charles Cridland and Harrison Woods by a mutual friend of ours who said that we should have a conversation because we were all in the parking industry. I think I had lunch with Charles and Harrison 3 times in 1 month and got more and more interested every time we sat down. So my primary interest was finding out, I guess, originally how YPS could help Infinium's journey. You know, we have an awful lot of fleet customers that have ad hoc requirements. YPS had a lot of interesting space out there that was available on demand, we could get into the next day, was incredibly flexible, was economically well priced. And so we started to form a relationship very quickly about that, but we got really interested fundamentally in the YPS operating model. And I guess how it was different from the existing market in which we were all operating. So I think one of the key differences that we see in your parking space is that, like many new entrants into a very traditional and established market, you have the ability to be disruptive. And I think that you've been disruptive in a really interesting way, and not just a single way. So the first thing I'd say is that your approach to technology meant that you had no legacy. So in defining your technology journey, you ended up with an incredibly strong marketplace and platform, but also you matched that with edge technology that you were using on sites that was modern, that was easy to use, and probably lowest cost, best specification for purpose. It wasn't a legacy equipment play that you saw in the rest of the market. So I think one of the interesting things about your technology choice on sites is that it's very easy to use. And that is going to help the transition to virtual use and non-physical use of payment, particularly for parking. But it becomes much more interesting as we transition into the decarbonised EV world and how people will want to unify and pay for and utilise transactions of that nature for charging as well as parking. And I'd say that if my mother can use it, then you've got something right on site. So that seems to be working well. I think when I look at your operations of new sites, one of the key things that you have an advantage in is, you have an overhead light operating model, which is really interesting. You have the best, lowest cost tech model, in my view, which I think is very interesting. You then have a marketplace of existing customers that you can point to new sites when they're better than the sites they were parking in before, which is also interesting. And then you have a light overhead operating model, which means that from a management context, you're going to be a very competitive player. And I'm sure the market is looking at that, trying to understand how to compete against you in the medium term. That's going to have a lot to do with the sites that you've won in the last 12 months, which have been, a large number of sites. And I would guess larger than most other parking operators in the world in the last 12 months. I think it will always be true that car park usage is driven by human behaviour, and that a large percentage of people park in locations because of convenience over price. I think where businesses like YPS and YPS in particular are winning is where consumers are making that choice or seeking better value and are prepared to be slightly flexible about where they park. And you can see that in the growth of pre-book, and that's happening everywhere. But where people are consciously looking for value, you are going to capture a lot of that audience because you're easy to use, you're well established, and you're a very well-known brand in the space. So I think that's a strength. I think there are a lot of similarities in the Irish market with the UK market, and I know that you've launched there recently. I think that makes an awful lot of sense. I was actually at the Irish Parking Association event a few months ago, and they're expecting a very rapid return to normality over in Ireland now, post-COVID. I suppose the question would be, which market do you attack next? And America has to be in your windscreen. I think across Europe, a lot of the experiences for operators were similar in lockdown. There was just no activity. That caused different problems depending on which country and which business you were in. I think what particularly interests me about YourParkingSpaces' performance during COVID was that you were a business that continued to grow. That was almost universally not true anywhere else in the parking market that I'm aware of. And I think latterly, emerging from COVID, you've grown much more quickly than probably I would have expected, or maybe even you would have expected. So I think Infinium Logistics Solutions, as we now refer to ourselves, Infinium Logistics, our approach is very much focused around fleet customers. Those fleet customers have got bespoke requirements in very, very unusual locations in terms of the traditional parking market. But even so, that being true, YourParkingSpaces have been able to fulfill a really good amount of volume for us in unusual locations that we wouldn't have thought were going to work or will be necessarily relevant. That's been a very welcome outcome from working together. Where does the future go? Well, between now and 2030, the whole EV transition agenda is going to drive change in the industry overall. And it's going to change the way in which people drive and the way in which people park and the way in which people charge. And I think being at the forefront of that and having technology that unifies the existing parking world and activities with the new activities of EV charging is essential. And if you're at the forefront of that, then you have a very, very interesting future. I think when I see the new branding in new management locations, it seems to be working really well. It's fresh, clean, very, very obvious what it's meant to do. And being able to use the equipment so easily has been a positive. And I'm sure that the industry is reflecting on that. And I'm sure we'll be following very quickly along the same lines.